Dread Delusion is a completely new style of game for me. In visuals and even quest design, it harkens back to a simpler time, but presented generally well. But what truly strikes me about Dread Delusion is the setting. Revolving around a neuron star, you'll be traversing different floating rocks that have a weird flora, fauna, and people accompanying them. Coming from the appropriately named dev, Lovely Hellplace, and published by Dread XP, Dread Delusion released on May 14th, 2024 for $19.99 US. And to not waste any time and give you the footnote version, the game is great and offers a lot of content. And it's not always the most compelling, but when the game hits, it hits hard with very, very few detractors. Put simply, I don't know the journey that the game went on during its early access period, but this feels like a game that's had years of love and care from both the developer and a community alike. Now, that was the quick version, but I want to emphasize that this game isn't as accessible as many people would probably expect nowadays. Be it the lack of health regeneration, map markers, easy fast travel, and even voice acting, there's plenty of reasons why any one person can draw conflict with this game's design. However, I'm here to say that these aren't deal breakers and are generally great additions, or well, at least subtractors, from the formula that is Dread Delusion. Just like any just like any game of this sort, you do start out as a prisoner, and in order to gain your freedom, you have to do a little bit of work as an Inquisitor. And while I really don't want to get into, general story concepts here, the main narrative actually revolves around assembling a bit of a team to take down your target. And in coming across and meeting each of these team members, you're going to get obviously unique quests for each of them, and generally speaking, some of the greater moral dilemmas within the game. The first major one that you come across deals with the idea of what it means to be human, and when does one, from being machine to humanoid, become human. And these great moral quandaries are present all throughout the game in different meaningful ways. This game is a lot about religion. Again, I'm not talking specifically about the narrative itself, but more so a lot of the themes that go along with it. The Inquisition that marks a lot of the early lands that you're in are anti-God, they're anti-religion. And the reason is because gods are an actual physical entity within this world, and you can come across them. And that is actually one of the bigger moral choices that you can make throughout the game. And while this was completely from just a tiny side Inquisitor guard dialogue, there's one line that really stuck with me, and perfectly explains how this game makes you feel. And that is, I don't blame them, but I do punish them. And that's referring to the fact that there is famine. People are starving, and when they worshiped the gods, everything was bountiful. They had good crops, they had good harvests, everything was healthy within the world, and they weren't suffering. But when it comes to that, that is what is said. And to me, that is insane. Like, the level of thinking in this game at all times, seemingly at all times. There's funny moments within this game, there's brevity, lightheartedness from time to time, but generally speaking, just looking at this world that I'm showing to you on screen here, you can see that it looks like a fever dream. It looks like an acid trip, if that's what you really want to say. And with this higher level of thinking that you have to do a lot of the time, there is a level of comprehension and challenge that this game asks of the player that is so satisfying and so rewarding. Now, is this the most challenging, puzzling game in the whole world? No, it's not. I don't think I ever died in this game due to combat. I can't tell you how many times I, fell off of a floating rock to my death. Speaking of which, there was one point where I did have a collision issue rising up an elevator. I did fall down. Of course, there was no way for me to quickly save myself, so that was unfortunate. And it happened twice in a row on a really long elevator. But it is what it is. Regardless though, Dread Delusion absolutely nails exactly what it's saying, a sense of dread. And the ability for the game to tackle different atmospheres comes in waves. The first wave being, of course, the initial location that you're in, graduating on from that tutorial area, and then eventually moving on to one of the other areas like the Clockwork Kingdom. Each of these areas, whether it be from the soundtrack, which is very beautiful, although a bit repetitive, or the very different enemy designs in each of these locations, and even different styles of questing from time to time, it's amazing how each of these locations feels somewhat different. And that goes even further when you're dealing with those assembling your team quests as you get further along. But there's nothing too crazy I really want to say about the story. I can't really comment specifically about the game's pacing in any meaningful way from a main story standpoint, because I did a lot of the side questing earlier on in the game. But what I will say is the side quests feel rewarding in every sense of the word. I'll break down exactly what I mean from a gameplay standpoint in just a moment, but you get level ups from time to time. But more importantly, the morality of a lot of these quests comes into play in major ways. And in certain quests, you can even change the world around you. Although it's not the greatest scale, it's still really nice to see. Narratively speaking, the one thing that I would have wished did make a little bit of a stronger appearance is a quest log, which this is kind of a gameplay thing, I guess. But as you're going through a quest log, you have like your main objective and it tells you the most recent little snippet of what's happened. Now obviously these snippets in the menu can change as you go along. I wish there was a log that you could see each of these changes as you go along, so you kind of got like that full journal listing of everything that's happened in the quest. That way you could catch up if you hadn't played the game in a day or two. I say this because I don't think that would be a major change from the developer, that I think it would be something that was so impossible to achieve. Moving on to the actual gameplay itself, there's a lot to love about this aspect of the game. First off, it's almost perfectly paced gameplay-wise the entire time. And how I knew that was the case was, as soon as I came across something that I was like, man, this game really could use this right about now. Well, guess what? That's when that would get introduced to me. One example of this would be, wow, this is a really large world that I'm exploring and I'm not moving very fast. Well, I go to a shop and what's there except a spell that makes me move at whatever times speed, and it even allows me to jump from high places without dying. Although it does take away your health, which kind of messed with my brain a little bit, but that's okay. The one exception I will make to great pacing is actually the map itself. This could have been because of the fact that I missed it earlier on in the tutorial area, but it was super frustrating and annoying to have to fill out the map in the way that I did. I would much rather be able to just visit the town and actually just buy a map of the area. And the reason for that is that earlier on, it's really hard to kind of navigate in this visual style of a world. Maybe that's just me. And ultimately, I figured it out. You know what I mean? This isn't something that detracted from my experience overall, but this definitely would have helped me get into the game much faster. Now, there is an in-game lore reason, being that the islands can shift around, and that's why certain maps may not be up to date, so you have to create your new one with the Academy. However, I don't know, I just wasn't feeling that. But okay, now that I have those minor gripes out of the way, let's actually break down the combat and the exploration of the game a little bit, and we'll end out with a little bit of a final verdict after that, because there's really not much else I have to say about this game. So let's start off with the gear and the combat system of the game. So of course you can wear clothes and armor and different things like that, as well as equip different weapons such as swords and daggers, and even bows, and all of these things can be upgraded to become more efficient, and especially in terms of the clothing you can wear, can get you different perks as well, be it adding to your charisma to where you get better prices, or your lockpicking skill, different things like that. And in that way, I think it's a very simple and robust system to the game. One thing I will praise the game for is that every enemy you're killing, which you're killing a good bit of enemies throughout the game, you're not getting a weapon every time one of them dies. You know what I mean? You're not getting an abundance of iron swords in your inventory or anything like that. Sure, you might find one here or there throughout the world, but I never had this issue. And of course, you can sell things for gold and even buy new weapons at vendors if that's how you choose to do so. Otherwise, you'll find silks and ores throughout the world from killing enemies or, harvesting from different places that you will be able to upgrade these organically or once again buy the materials and use at a workbench. Speaking of workbenches, you also have alchemy. You can craft different potions of all kinds of different effects. I thought this was a really great alchemy system. Personally, I just used a lot of poisons that you could put on your weapons, help to take care of enemies much faster. But the system that I didn't play with as much as I wanted to during this playthrough was magic. Genuinely, I did nothing with magic. They give you that basic starter attack spell at the beginning of the game, which I used a couple times to spice up my gameplay, if you will, but I very quickly turned it into a utilitarian use of just running around the map very, very fast. And I'm glad I did that, but I wish I would have leaned further into magic for the playthrough, at least at one point, in order to truly give a wide berth to all the types of variety of gameplay. But what I will say, though, is every bit of magic I used within the game felt really good and very important. Same with the weapons itself. Anytime I made a meaningful weapon upgrade, or even when I upgraded my character to better utilize my strength, I felt that every time in combat. And that's the number one thing you can say for an RPG where you're going to be spending hours upon hours within it, is that you want to feel those upgrades, and you most definitely do. As for the enemies of the game, I've got to say, they can be a bit repetitive at times, but as you kind of go through all of these little side areas in some of these major locations, you will notice that there is a decent bit of enemy variety for each area you're going into. However, I'll put it in quotes here, overworld of each of these areas generally tends to have just a few basic types of enemies, with maybe even just slight variation. I think it works well enough, but once you've spent enough time going from location to location, it does drag a bit. Now, the reason I say that, you might be going from location to location if you're not using a guide, is there are no map markers in this game. This is very Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, if I had to compare it to anything, and I don't know if it's the visuals that are doing that for me, or the overall game feel, but I'm just getting a lot of Morrowind inspiration here. I think it's the alien landscape that you're in, mixed with the kind of low poly visuals. I think it is really good. If you like Morrowind, I think you will like this game, although this game is definitely way more action. You're not going to be missing an attack, even though you're clearly hitting. But okay. Now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the enemies, we've talked about the story, we've talked about the combat, let's end out with the exploration. I think this is one of the major aspects of the game, and the part that's really satisfying to me. So to me, exploration in Dread Delusion means two things. First off, talking to people. There's not going to be a lot of people that go out of their way to talk to you, and of course you have to find people for the story, but you should really be talking to as many people as you can. A lot of people have interesting things to say. For instance, that quote that I shared earlier, I didn't have to talk to that guard, but I'm very glad that I did, because I thought that quote really stuck with me. But as you speak to all these different people, a lot of times, pretty much anyone within the game world can be helpful to whatever you're trying to accomplish, as long as you're generally in the right area. So in that way, whether it be picking up side quests or just learning cool little lore tidbits, there's a lot to explore within the NPCs of Dread Delusion. On top of that, however, you also have the very physical landscape exploration. Whether it be seeing a hole in the side of a building with a couple crates that you can climb up and find an upgrade, or even, shimmying your way along a cliff, going all the way across a field just for one small little site. There's so much beauty to be discovered within this land, whether it be the landscapes themselves, the very weird visuals that you may see in some little nook or cranny somewhere, or once again, the actual physical upgrades from within the game. That's one thing I haven't really talked about yet. You don't level up in this game by any of the conventional methods by my standard. There are no XP points for killing enemies, and it is not level by use, where if you use a sword so many times, your one-handed's going to go up. The way that you level up within this game is finding quite literal upgrade points around the world. They're called delusions, or delusion fragments, or whatever they are, and you usually need a couple to get a full upgrade point, which you can put into your normal stats within an RPG. And what I really like about this system of leveling up is it perfectly complements what I believe is the main part of this game, the exploration. I saved the best for last for a good reason. While you can grind in this game to some extent for certain items, if that's what you want to do, having more throwing knives or, I suppose, gold or anything like that, that's not the main aspect of the game. In my opinion, exploration is key here. Whether you're finding a new sight to see or a new reward, that's the main goal of this RPG. And I think the more time you spend within this world, the more you're going to fall in love with it, and the more you may find yourself immersed in a world that doesn't make sense to us visually. With that being said, with Dread Delusion being $20, I can't recommend this game enough. This has very quickly shot up from a game that I'd never heard of to a game that I was passively following to one of my games of the year. I don't know if it's in my top spot just yet. I would have to really look at my list by the time we're getting closer to the end, but it's definitely up there. So with that being said, my name is fallinghurts. I thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, consider sharing it. And if someone from the dev team happens to see this, those goblin plushies are cool and all, but man, you guys really need to have physical map posters. Those are the best things for any RPG. Thank you so much for watching this video, and yes, goodbye.